Thousands of men and women in this country have made sacrifices for this nation, and we are so thankful for them. Today, I'm honored to sit down with Matthew Quist, a former captain in the Canadian Armed Forces. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You served in a NATO mission in Afghanistan at a time when it was a pretty scary place to be. Were you ever afraid?
That's a good question. I don't know if I felt overly afraid. I mean, we had rockets coming in overhead and bombs in the road ahead of us and stuff like that were defused by the engineers. But it's funny, like when the one night we had a pretty good rocket attack and it actually hit some places that were actually inside the camp, and there were some casualties, which weren't reported at the time. But I don't know if I felt fear. I would say I felt very alive.
Of course, we're coming to Remembrance Day. It's a time when we remember people like you who've made sacrifices for this nation, people who are working to bring peace to the world. What are your thoughts as we come to Remembrance Day?
Well, I think Remembrance Day for me is a time to remember people I've served with, people who've fought in conflicts past. I think a lot about families, and I think a lot about what war does to families all over the world, whether they're people in conflict zones that we're trying to help, or whether it's families of soldiers, sailors, airmen, airwomen that also serve in their own ways as their loved ones are gone. So I think a lot about that and the impact on some of the people that I've served with too. So those are things I kind of think about and that come to mind this time of year for me.
Your time in the Canadian Armed Forces ended prematurely. You broke your back. Tell me a little bit about that time for you, because I know it was really tough for you.
Yeah, it's different. I went overseas and I wound up fine over there. Got home, 100% safe. Other than maybe being a little tired or worn out, I guess. But I was on a reserve exercise in 2015. Headed out to Shiloh from Winnipeg. Hit black ice. The truck went off the road. I wound up having a T12 vertebra broken. I had a 5-disc spinal fusion after that, so I have a pretty good looking piece of hardware in my back from that. And about a 7 or 8 month recovery, followed by learning to live with that as the new normal for me. So I went through a bit of a journey with Veterans Affairs a little bit, and with some of the things that they do, and then major depression as well. So I've sort of walked that out and had to go through a bit of the mental health side of things to kind of walk through that stuff. And it's just been a bit of a journey. Yeah, I've come out the other side of that and in better shape than I was at the time, and now I'm feeling pretty good about things. But it's certainly a journey, and it's not something you expect when you get injured like that you're also going to have to go through the mental side of it. Physical things are one thing, but the mental side of it is another. And so that's something a lot of people go through when they get injured in the forces, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are such a man of faith. How did your faith play into these circumstances?
Well, it's funny. When I broke my back, I was in the hospital, and I got to the hospital at Portage-la-Prairie, and they took a CAT scan, and they immediately spined me. So they put me down on a spinal board and locked me down. And some crazy things go through your head when they start doing that. It's pretty serious at that point. And it's funny what comes back. And there's a psalm that says, when I'm afraid, I'll trust in him. And that's all I could think of at the time. And so, faith gets real when you're challenged and you're put in that spot. And sometimes that's all you've got to grab, right? So for me, that really helped. And I was actually in the hospital over Easter, and I'd never felt so much hope when I saw the sunrise on an Easter morning. I honestly, it still kind of ties me up, because when I looked out the window, I just felt, he's risen. Like, it was awesome, really cool.
You think about a lot of people listening to this interview who are going through their own tough times. What advice would you give them about how to cling to God even when you don't understand?
I would tell them, or advise them, not tell them, but I would advise them that the Lord has broad shoulders. He can take what you can give him. He can take all your honesty. He can take all your anger and all your hurt and all your frustration and all the feelings that you have about what's going on, and he'll listen. And when you're totally honest with him and open with him, he'll come back with love. And that's what I experienced. I had a night in the hospital where, not ashamed to say, I had quite an argument with God, and I let him have it pretty good. And if that was a friend, I think they probably wouldn't have called me for a couple weeks, maybe a month, but the Lord just waited until I was done, and he sort of just said, you know, I love you, and I have control here, and I knew this would happen, and I got it. Just let me work, right? And you know, it's like in Job, right, where Job is asking all these questions, and then the Lord just shows up, and all the questions stop, because when he shows up, that's when it gets different. It all changes when he walks in the room, right?
So good. Thank you so much for taking the time to come speak to us today, and thank you for what you have done for our country. So appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a great experience for me. I loved wearing the uniform. I loved serving, and it was you get to see a lot of things that people don't get to see, and do things people don't get to do, and see some great places. So I really enjoyed serving. So thanks for having me.
You know, we're adding new and powerful stories every day, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe and stay up to date with our latest content.